It was mid-March when Jim Ingle began to feel pain in his lower back.
Hi, my name's Jim Ingle.
It was a pain that was so severe he couldn't sleep.
So when people, usually when you go to the doctors and they'll say, rate your pain, like 1 to 10, what would you rate that headache and that back pain as? 10 being the most severe.
So it was 7, it wasn't debilitating, but it was certainly something that I couldn't sleep through, and I had to take painkillers in order to sort of get rest. But I still hadn't connected it to the COVID.
Even though he was aware that the world was in the midst of desperately fighting COVID-19, he thought muscle spasms were to blame, certainly not a virus. But over the next few days, the pain intensified and shifted to his neck and then to his head, causing severe headaches. The telltale signs of COVID-19 took hold. Dry cough, a loss of taste and smell.
It was like having 5 times worse than you felt on your worst day of a flu for 14 days. So that was not good.
Welcome to the Healthy You podcast from North Shore University Health System, where we explore trending topics in healthcare. I'm Carolyn Starks.
And I'm Jon Hillenbrand.
Hi, Jon. How are you?
Good. Glad to be here.
This is going to be a great podcast today.
Yeah, I'm excited about it.
So I had the honor of interviewing a patient, Jim Ingle, about a month ago. And Jim recovered from COVID-19 at home while quarantining away from his wife and 4 children. He lives on the North Shore. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say he had a mild case. He certainly wouldn't say that. It was rough going there for a while.
Yeah.
But he considers himself one of the lucky ones. About 90% of our patients at North Shore that test positive are recovering at home with mild to moderate symptoms. And I think that's a part of the story that brings some perspective to this pandemic. It's uplifting and encouraging, especially in a time during this pandemic when things can look so bleak.
Yeah, it's nice to know that there are quite a few people out there who are recovered, and not a lot of people are talking about that.
The flip side, though, is that this pandemic is like a crapshoot almost. It's maddening to think that you don't really know what you're going to get.
First of all, am I going to get it? And then Second of all, am I going to be totally fine with nearly no symptoms? And third of all, am I going to be one of those people who has to go to the hospital? And then what happens then? So yeah, it's definitely an unknown.
So I spoke with Jim, and here's what we talked about.
Hi, my name's Jim Ingle. I live on the North Shore of Chicago. I work as a executive at a consulting firm. And back in mid-March, I was having severe lower back pain, and it was unusual for me. I couldn't sleep. Had several days of that. Had no other sort of COVID symptoms, but had severe, body aches in the lower back.
Jim, at the time, what were you thinking?
At the time, I was thinking I was having muscle spasms in my lower back, but it didn't really feel like muscle spasms, but I wasn't connecting it to COVID-19. So I just thought, man, something's going on with my lower back. And
right.
So I didn't have a fever, anything like that, but what happened from there is it kind of shot from my lower back into my head and had a severe headache and started getting a dry cough. So I started to put 2 and 2 together, and my sense of smell went away as well. And then so I went and got tested, and the test came back in a day as positive. The cough with the headache was intense. I mean, I felt like I was going to have a brain aneurysm because The cough got worse, and the headache was so severe that the cough made it really worse.
Right.
And so
the pressure, huh?
The pressure, yeah. The thing that kind of kept me from freaking out or sane, if you will, is I had a pulse oxygen meter. Mm-hmm. And so I'd contacted my doctor. I said, hey, I've tested positive. They recommended that I get one or find one and monitor my blood oxygen levels. So I did that. And periodically, several times a day, I would check, and they said as long as it stays above 93, you're getting enough oxygen, you'll probably be fine. If it gets below 93, you're going to have to probably go to the hospital and get assisted with oxygen.
By mid-March, we knew enough about COVID to be afraid and yet not afraid of it. We didn't know what to think. I mean, there were horror stories, but then there was news that majority will have mild cases. So I'm wondering how you wrapped your brain around it in terms of fear for you or your family. What was going through your head?
Well, I got to say the saving grace for me was the oxygen, blood oxygen, because I had tightness in the chest. I have asthma anyway, and so that was I'm sort of at risk.
Right.
And so my chest was really heavy. I couldn't really take deep breaths. So
now, was that something you felt before with your asthma, or was this something different?
Sure. I have felt that before, but this was a heaviness. It was almost like I could breathe okay shallow, and the interesting thing is when I was prone, my breathing was better than if I was, vertical.
Right.
Which is weird because if I was laying down, I was able to breathe a little deeper and better. I was doing my asthma medication as a maintenance, just to keep ahead of, trying to breathe as well as I could. The thing that's kind of saved me from kind of freaking out was the oxygen levels of the blood.
And how did your family react to the news when you told them? I forgot how many kids you have. I think you said 3.
4 kids.
4, yeah.
And a wife and a dog. And so lucky enough, I have my office is on the 3rd floor with a bedroom and a bathroom, and so I was sequestered to the 3rd floor, and so they begrudgingly brought me food.
Yeah, I bet they were scared.
Yeah, so they were masked and gloved up, and they would sort of slide the food under the door and run, But so yeah, they kept me alive with food and and saw my requests, but it was not fun. I mean, I kind of ran the whole gamut of I think I had pretty much all the symptoms because I initially for the first week I was just body aches and then cough and no fever. I had no fever, and then for almost 2 solid weeks it was fever, chills, cough, headache. No smell, heaviness in the chest, you name it, and I had it all. So,
were you initially diagnosed? So you have those initial symptoms. Did you do a telehealth meeting with one of our North Shore doctors? Say, hey, I have these symptoms. What should I do?
Well, actually, I did, and he recommended that I go to the COVID e-visit on North Shore website and sort of go to one of the testing facilities. And so I did that. And that's how I got the testing positive.
Do you feel like you kind of knew? Like, yes. Even though while you were waiting for the test, you kind of knew this is positive?
Yes. I mean, because as you're watching the news and the symptoms started to stack on top of one another, I'm like, I've got it. There's just no doubt. And soon, when my sense of smell went on top of the cough, on top of the heaviness in the chest, on top of, the body aches, it's kind of like, I'm pretty sure I got it.
So did you turn the news off? How did you, I'm wondering if you were wanted to watch the news and get information, or was it too much, was it overwhelming to watch the news?
No, I mean, it's something that's, I don't know, you kind of get glued to and affixed to, and it's sort of like it always kind of ran in the background. I mean, I would try to do other things, but it was always there, and always on with updates of, number of cases, number of deaths, and all that kind of stuff. And so I just kept it on in the background, just to see. Yeah. And for me, it got pretty intense a couple of weeks in, and I called the doctor again, and I was ready for, hey, hydroxychloroquine, anything. I'll try anything. This is not going well, because I felt like if I take another step down, so I did start to get a little bit more fearful as it just continued not to go away, and it progressed and got worse, almost, 2 weeks in, and then it started to turn. So,
when you think about it, look how severe and how horrible you felt that you were, in a sense, willing to be a guinea pig for hydroxychloroquine.
Oh,
that's how bad you felt.
Absolutely. I was certainly willing to see whether it would reduce my symptoms or do something. But since my oxygen levels were okay, they kind of just said, hey, buck up. And I know you don't feel good, but it'll eventually get better. And it did, but it took a long time.
I think that would have been the hardest conversation if I were you, just to trust, because I know we are familiar with respiratory diseases, but there's so much, even during the time you had it, that was changing about the virus. Like, new information kept coming in.
Right. There's all kinds of things that would pop onto the news and said, hey, they could, it could damage your brain, and there's, all kinds of, great, that's good news.
Yeah.
But I guess I can't do anything about it now.
So was there anything else besides the oxygen meter that kept you calm and sane?
I'm just not wired, though. I'm not a person that sort of wigs out or freaks out about. I just like, we'll get through it, and so I'm that type of personality. So I trusted the doctors to say, hey, my oxygen levels are good. I was worried, sure. I was more worried about trying to go into the hospital and possibly going on a ventilator. That's what was really scary, because it was all over the news, 70%, 75% that go on ventilators don't come off, and blah, blah, blah. So that was, playing in my head. It was just a super, bad time. The flu symptoms, it's like everybody's had the flu at one point in time in their life, and you think about, the worst couple of days of flu symptoms, and you just progress that for 2 weeks plus. It's really it's exhausting. I lost about 10 pounds. Maybe a lot of it was water weight, because I would just soak my bed every night with the sweats and stuff like that. So one of the things you said, what really made it the difference for me that I forgot to tell you about, is that you prescribe a prescription cough medicine, which stopped my cough, which kept me from thinking I was going to have a brain aneurysm because of the pain and the pressure in my head. So that helps with my anxiety tremendously, because when I was coughing a lot and had that severe headache, man, it was intense pain, and you're like, I don't know. So
Wow.
So when they stopped the cough through a prescription cough medicine, that really was a game changer for how bad I felt. I mean, I was able to. It felt terrible, but I was able to manage it because I wasn't coughing and causing those spikes in pain in my head.
So when you took a turn, what was that like? Your fever? Did your fever break like we know with the flu? Like suddenly you wake up and you're drenched and you're like, oh, my fever broke. Or was it more gradual?
I thought that, it's like, well, great. I was, woke up all, drenched and stuff. And I'm like, oh, maybe my fever broke. But it was Groundhog Day. It would just happen over and over and over again. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess it's not breaking. It's just hanging out. So I'm fighting it, but it's fighting back. So, I was drenched for, over a week, just, fighting chills and sweats and that kind of stuff. So,
how did your family handle it? You said you're kind of you're not a quote unquote worrier.
Well, see, my wife handled it a little less. She's the kind of she's right. I mean, I'm the kind of guy that's like, well, hey, I'm just going to tough it out. I'll get through it. And she thinks that I overdo that. She was in my face, at a distance, trying to convince me to go to the hospital multiple times. She's like, you're being stupid. You need to go to the hospital, because she knew how bad I felt. And I just said, what are they going to do for me there? I mean, give me oxygen. My oxygen levels are fine.
Yeah.
So I kind of, pushed her back, because she was definitely recommending that I go to the hospital multiple times, multiple days.
I think there are a lot of women out there and wives who can definitely relate to what she did. I think I would be the same.
And I also felt like the hospitals are overwhelmed with, people that are in a heck of a lot, maybe more serious condition than I'm in. Why take up a hospital bed, if I can, stay at home? And but I did call the doctor and say, hey, man, I was kind of groping for some sort of, treatment, experimental. I mean, I was just so done with this virus. I'm like, can we do something here?
Yeah.
And it was kind of like, no, you just have to tough it out.
How do you think this has changed your life? When you look, maybe 5 years from now or 10 years, how do you think your life has changed?
Well, I mean, I'm hoping that it doesn't. I mean, the only good thing that I think that could come out of this is if I have some sort of lifetime immunity, but we don't even know what that means or if there is such a thing. And I'm hoping that we find some sort of combination of existing drugs or therapies that knock this thing down, or that we find a vaccine that's sort of in a year, 18 months, or whatever, the world can kind of return to normal, even though I think this has definitely been a wake-up call for the world.
And how long have you been symptom-free? Are you allowed back off the third floor?
Oh yeah. So I'm on my third or fourth week. So I mean, yeah. So I'm reintegrated into the family dynamic. So, but I'm super glad to be through it, and but it gave me a new sort of perspective on it. I was kind of one of the ones that were sort of like, this is not as bad as the flu, or just kind of like the same, and they're making a heck of a lot bigger deal out of it. But now that I got it, I mean, I'm in pretty good shape, work out all the time, and I can see if you're older and have a compromised, sort of underlying condition, how this could put you down. I mean, it was pretty intense. I kept going, one more day. I just got through another day.
Oh, God, I can't even imagine. I am so thankful that you shared your story. And I think the good thing is that, we got somebody who's like willing to push through it, because if it happened to me, I'm such a worrier, I'd be afraid. I'd be there with your wife.
Well, I was fighting several, females in my household to go to the hospital. My daughters, my wife, and I'm like, no, I'm gonna monitor my blood oxygen, and they would ask me like 6 times a day, what's your, they were almost, I mean, this is joking, but they were almost hoping it would be below 93 so I could go to the hospital, because they really wanted me to go to the hospital. So.
Basically, you're no longer Jim or Dad, you're a number. What's your number?
Right.
Wow. So that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
He thinks he got it from his daughter, who had a fever for 3 days, in early March.
Yeah.
But then it just went away. So they weren't thinking COVID. They just thought.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love his story because it's a good reminder to all of us that the majority of COVID patients have mild to moderate symptoms and do recover and can do so at home.
Right. He's showing us the brave way of getting through it.
I just want to thank Jim again for sharing his story and being so open with us.
Yeah, he's great. Good interview.
What's coming up next?
If you're not subscribed to our podcast, please subscribe, because in the next podcast, we're going to be talking to Dr. Ernie Wong,
Chief of Emergency Medicine at North Shore.
He'll be talking about his experiences with coronavirus from a frontline perspective.
Fascinating person to talk to, a good friend of the show.
Yeah.
What show?
Right.
Stop. Okay.
Caller, you're on line 1.
We're taking calls now.
Let's go to the calls. Oh, the board's lighting up.
Either way.
Next week, folks.
Yes.
No. Next podcast, folks.
We'll let you know when that interview is ready to publish. Okay. I tried to get out of this.
It'll just come out.
Oh, okay. Okay, let's wrap this up.
Yeah.
You've been listening to the Healthy You podcast from North Shore University Health System. I'm Carolyn Starks.
And I'm Jon Hillenbrand.
And thanks.